think we'll maybe give it a minute or two as people start trickling in. Well, why don't I get started with the introductions while people start coming in. So welcome everyone to the session Working with Vanderbot to add multilingual content in English and Arabic to Wikidata. This session is being live streamed to the LD4 YouTube channel, and it will be saved on YouTube for future viewing. Please be sure to check out the useful resources on this intro slide, including our code of conduct, how to join Slack, the tech support channel in Slack, and the Twitter hashtag. As this is a webinar, the best way to ask questions is to make use of the built-in Zoom Q&A function. Now to introduce our session. Our speakers today are Steve Baskoff and Anjali Panakabut-Roberts. Steve is the Data Science and Data Curation Specialist at Vanderbilt University. Steve has published on expressing biodiversity metadata as linked data, and one of his current areas of focus is gaining experience with the practical aspects of creating Wikidata items for artworks and linking them to their image files in Wikimedia Commons. Anjali Panakabut-Roberts, with the Thai nickname Joy, is head of cataloging at the University of Tennessee Libraries since 2018 and was head of cataloging and metadata at University of Tennessee Libraries from 2016 to 2018. Her prior positions were head of cataloging and metadata, American University in Cairo Libraries, Egypt from 2013 to 2016, cataloging and metadata and multicultural services librarian and women's and gender studies faculty, University of Nebraska-Lincoln from 2007 to 2013, catalog librarian, St. Cloud State University, Minnesota from 2005 to 2007, and assistant professor in library science, University of Western Ontario, Canada from 2002 to 2005. She received her Master in Library and Information Studies from University of Wisconsin-Madison with all but dissertation from the same institution. Her research interests are on the future of cataloging and metadata, linked data and semantic web, researcher identity management, and scholarly communication. The presentation today will discuss the example workflow to add both English and Arabic character sets to Wikidata using Vanderbot. Joy will also discuss data visualization in Wikidata to provide insight into scholarly communication related to medieval Islamic technology. Take it away, Steve and Joy. Let me stop my share.
Go. Let me get this. But thank you, Peggy, for your introduction. So I have the privilege to work with two of my senior colleagues to work on this presentation on working with Vanderbot to add multilingual content in English and Arabic to Wikidata. Steve and Iman had been, since you already introduced Steve, I want to introduce Iman Dagger, my colleague who's Arabic and Islamic study metadata librarian at the University of California, Los Angeles. Steve and Iman had been, and I had been working on this project to apply Vanderbot to work on the translation in English from the original in Arabic. So Steve and I will go through the presentation and we will be happy to answer questions from Q&A at the end of our presentation. I also like to acknowledge Iman who also attend this session. So for this presentation, we will cover the project's background and goal, Vanderbot and workflow, object relationship data modeling for works of translation with some case examples of English translation of the original works in Arabic and the workflow. I also have some reflection on required workload, quality control issue, and required skill set. At the conclusion, I will also discuss additional work for Vanderbot. So for the background of this project, how I came to work with Iman, my interest in Wikidata came from my general interest in linked data and how it can transform our practice in describing information objects and how we can also build a relationship among the objects to trace scholarly communication and ideas. I also got interested in Islamic technology from my past job working for the American University in Cairo libraries, where I first encountered the work of Al-Jazari, the Muslim inventor of the elephant clock, as a precursor of the modern robotics. Working in Cairo, Egypt also led me to get connected with Iman, who shares the interest in medieval Islamic technology and Wikidata. I'm thankful for Iman for my work, for her contribution to add Arabic information into this and other Wikidata projects. Steve has also been supportive of my learning to apply Vanderbot and very generous to share his time and expertise with us throughout this process. First, I heard about Vanderbot through LD4 Affinity Group, Wikidata Affinity Group, and PCC Wikidata pilot earlier in 2021. But I didn't have a chance to learn how to use it until in July last year in 2021 when I attended the Idea Institute on AI on my campus. I dedicate my time at the Institute to learn how Vanderbot works in the Wikidata sandbox. It's not until earlier this year that I could get back into working with Steve and Iman to apply Vanderbot to create Wikidata items with the real data and decide as a group to submit a conference proposal to this conference. Thank you again for this opportunity to share with you our initial analysis from this experiment and work in progress with Vanderbot, and also with the works of English translation of the original work of Arabic. So for the goals, earlier we want to explore tools to add Wikidata items for English translation of original works in Arabic language. We also want to reduce the barrier for Arabic language speakers to contribute to Wikidata by using spreadsheets to input data into Wikidata. We also want to enrich some underrepresented topics in Wikidata, such as medieval Islamic technology with multilingual data labels. So next, Steve will present on his work with Vanderbot in this project.
Thanks. The Python script named Vanderbot isn't really a bot in the typical sense because it doesn't work on its own. Rather, it's a tool that works alongside a human to reduce the amount of time and work required to create items, claims, and references. Next slide, please. The source of the data is a CSV spreadsheet. Okay, lost the slide. Yeah, thanks. The source of the data is a CSV spreadsheet, and the end product is Wikidata items whose claims correspond to the data in the CSV. There are 3 stages of the process that are relevant to the topic of this talk: mapping the CSV columns to Wikidata properties, checking to make sure there are no existing items with the same levels and descriptions, and then actually uploading the data using the Wikidata Application Programming Interface, or API. Next slide. A simplified JSON configuration file is used to map the labels that are used for the column headers in the spreadsheet to Wikidata PIDs for the properties whose values are listed in that column in the spreadsheet. For each property, the type of value, such as item, string, date, etc., is indicated. There's also an opportunity to associate columns that contain qualifier data and reference information with that particular property. The configuration file is also used to indicate a list of languages in which the labels and descriptions will be provided. In the case of our project, we're providing both English and Arabic, so the language codes EN and AR are included in the configuration. Although this JSON file looks complicated, it isn't actually that hard to use if you just start with an existing file and then copy and paste the appropriate information for your model. And then once this configuration is set up, the file is used to create both a blank spreadsheet that has the right column headers and also a more complicated standardized file that's used by the Vanderbot script to do the actual column mapping. Next slide, please. Wikidata only allows one item to have a particular combination of label and description in a particular language. If you try to create a new item that duplicates the label and description of an existing item, the API will throw an error. So for this reason, before attempting to create each new item, the Vanderbot script sends a Sparkle query to the Wikidata query service to find out if the label description combination in any of the target languages already exists. Most people who use the query service are familiar with select queries, which retrieve information. In this case, we use a less common query form called ask. An ask query simply asks whether a particular pattern exists in the Wikidata graph. The response from the query service is either true or false. If the query service is asked whether a label description combination in a row in the spreadsheet already exists, and the response is true, then Vanderbot will skip trying to upload that row and log a warning. For more details about how to query Wikidata using Python, I have a blog post that you can view by scanning the QR code that's on the page here. Actually, can you go back to the slide? Yeah, thanks. In the process of working with non-Latin character sets, we made several interesting observations. One is that the method used to send the query to the query service is important. If you send raw UTF characters, they sometimes fail to match identical strings in the Wikidata graph. So for non-Latin labels and descriptions, they have to be sent as URL encoded strings, and the code here shows how that is done. The other interesting discovery we made is that two identical looking strings written in Arabic script may not match if one is encoded using the Arabic character set and the other is encoded using the Farsi character set. And this is an error that can happen if a Persian keyboard is used to enter an Arabic tagged string. Next slide, please. Once the check for duplicates is completed, then the Vanderbot script sends the data to the Wikidata API in the correct format, and a new item is created. The script also captures the claim and reference identifiers that are sent back from the API, and it records them in the CSV spreadsheet so that they can be used in the future if that particular information needs to be changed or deleted. Next slide.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for your explanation for the technical aspect of working with Vanderbot in this project. So the first lesson I learned in this project is that it is important to model a data set to design a spreadsheet and to decide on the Wikidata requirements for the types of work you are working with. In this case, I chose to work with works of translation from Arabic to English. This data model illustrates the relationship between the English translation in the triples of English translation as a Q Wikidata item with translation of property or addition or translation of property in Wikidata to connect with the Q item for the original work in Arabic. And I recommend using addition or translation of instead of translation of, since the inverse relationship has addition or translation work better with addition or translation of property? That is the inverse label translated as, but it is not a property, and the case example in Wikidata does not even include the label or item. Steve and I tweaked the spreadsheet based on an example as shown in Steve's presentation early on. Then he used the data Iman and I supplied to run Vanderbot for additional 2 items for this project. Then I verified the result and analyzed our work based on the 3 results so far. And here are some of my observations. For this title in particular, I found that it is more complex than our current data model for a single translation from Arabic to English can be used to represent it. This set has 3 books: the English translation and interpretation, the Arabic transcription and interpretation, the facsimile of the Arabic manuscript, and an interactive DVD-ROM. To completely represent this title and set, I would need to add the following properties and data: number of parts of this work, has part or parts, English translation, Arabic translation, facsimile of the original work, and also the DVD-ROM. I found this example in Wikidata item to learn about this additional property from the Wikidata item for the album Amicorum of Jacob Hayblock. So not all required data nor design properties are readily available. This is not unusual for working with Wikidata, by the way. For the additional research for this English translation of Al-Muradi's work and its original text in Arabic, I contacted the Biblioteca Medicea Lawrenziana of Florence, Italy, to ask for the manuscript information and received a response from Dr. Silvia Scipioni, the director, that the manuscript has a shelf mark Orientali 152 and included bibliographic information in her email with this link here. I want to thank Dr. Scipioni very much. I also emailed Dr. Ahmed Ragab to confirm that he is a translator of this work with Dr. Soha Bayumi, but they both don't have Wikidata items we could readily use. Dr. Ragab has his LC name identifier so that we can use to create a Wikidata item later on. Dr. Soha has her name in Wikidata in the author name string. So she also needs to have a Wikidata item created for her. It would be good if Wikidata property for translator name string can be created for the future use. For the book of instruction in the elements of Astrology by Al-Biruni, it is a reprint of the original translation in 1934. In Wikidata, I revised the title to add 1998 to distinguish this reprint edition from its original publication in 1934. So I could not add the publisher due to the lack of Wikidata item for the publisher that I need to create later. And I did not add the translator, Robert Ramsey, right at the beginning. He's a zoologist so I couldn't add that to Vanderbot at the beginning due to missing his information on this publication. I found his Wikipedia page, including his biographical information, but with no mentioning of his background on this subject nor his works of translation from Arabic. It took me to circle back a few times to explore further to the reference listed in his Wikipedia that I found his translation. It was mentioned in his Wikipedia's reference for the Dictionary of Canadian Biography. The original translation in 1934 is listed on his list of publication at the end of his biography, but the biography itself does not include his expertise in Arabic language nor anything else related to his work. So this discovery led me to his Wikidata item to add him as a translator of these translations Wikidata after we already created with Vanderbot. As Steve mentioned before, there's a known issue that Vanderbot won't work with multiple values for the same property. So the workaround is to add additional values to the same property, in this case, the main subject, after we already completed the initial upload by Vanderbot to create the item. In this example, it shows how we create the second spreadsheet to put the Q item information for the newly created item in the CSV file to add more main subjects. You can see that adding the existing main subject in Wikidata is to prevent Wikidata from creating a new item from the additional values alone. So in my reflection about workflow, workload, and quality control, from a project manager's perspective, because I think about, how do we pull the skills on this type of project? I found that for the quality control, the data are mostly Q items numbers. So I kind of missed that visual clues to do quality control based on the textual information on the elements that I'm used to in the long process. The quality control can still be done though after Vanderbot process the data from the spreadsheet. I also found the same issue in working with Wikidata in general, that not all required information is readily available as Wikidata items, and they may need to be created manually. As I mentioned earlier, the required elements for some complex item description may not be included in the data model, so they need to be manually input into Wikidata. And of course, it requires some extensive research on different data elements, such as the manuscript data, as I mentioned earlier. So my musing on the required skill set to work with Vanderbot. For the skill set to input the data into spreadsheet for Vanderbot, one still need to have a basic knowledge of how Wikidata works. I add a link to the introduction to Wikidata in the reference. My recommendation for the person or persons who would input the data to learn how to create Wikidata items first. This basic understanding of Wikidata would help the persons find and identify the record or needed data for the spreadsheet. And a team can work together to share expertise by including a team member or more who has the basic knowledge of Python and Wikidata to process the spreadsheet data using Vanderbot. So in conclusion, for works of translation, Vanderbot can work with the basic data requirements. For more complex translation works, for example, works including facsimile of the original text, the model can be modified to add more Wikidata properties or to manually input additional data elements. Working with Vanderbot with spreadsheet for translation still requires a basic understanding of Wikidata and familiarity with the best metadata practices for translation, the original work, and also for manuscripts in our case. For multilingual description, it also requires expertise in the language and culture of the original work. So we will need some work, we still have some work to do to complete the data modeling for translations. Per Iman's recommendation, we will consult the manuscript properties from the Wikidata Wiki project books to form our data modeling for Vanderbot for the manuscripts of the original works in Arabic. I provide a link to the manuscript property in this slide and in the reference. So that's conclude our presentation. I list Steve Vanderbot tutorial and his article about Vanderbot, and also other information you may be interested in. And also, when we talk about the triples, I add the graph-based data models and other information on Wikidata here as well. My own work relate to Wikidata are included in my faculty profile. Well, thank you so much, and we are ready for your question.
Thank you, Steve and Joy. I don't see anything in the Q&A yet. Please feel free, people, to put questions in there if you have any questions for Joy or Steve.
I see one question showing up in the Q&A, and it maybe is one for Joy to answer. Can you see it, Joy?
Or do you want me to read it? I can read it for you.
You're muted.
So that's for Zoe. Hi, Zoe. So for Zoe question, can you speak a bit more about the Wikidata properties, edition, translation of versus translation of? I would say because of the problem with the inverse relationship, I lost the question. I don't know where the question went.
I think it went in the answered column.
If you click on the answered tab, it should be in there now. Okay.
Yeah, so I would advocate for using edition or translation of because of the inverse label works better. Yeah.
So there's a question about explaining the difference between Vanderbot and Wikibot. So I kind of regret calling Vanderbot because it's not really a bot. It's really a tool. It's like pretty similar to how you would use OpenRefine. And Wikibot, I suppose you mean PyWikibot. PyWikibot is kind of like a framework for building mostly autonomous bots. So, for example, there's a bot, like if you put in an ISBN number and it doesn't have the right spacings, a bot will automatically detect that and change that. And so it's a little different from Vanderbot because Vanderbot really doesn't work on its own. A human creates a spreadsheet and then a human also like monitors it and specifically says, okay, I'm ready to upload the data now. So it's a lot like the way you'd use OpenRefine or quick statements. So one question that people ask is like, well, why did you make Vanderbot if there's already these other tools? And the answer to that is there's one thing is that I mentioned that Vanderbot basically tracks all the information like the ID numbers for the statements and the references. And so you can go in and delete a particular statement or a particular reference if you have that information. And I don't think either quick statements or OpenRefine does that. And the other thing, which is kind of a technical detail, is that Vanderbot, the format, I mentioned there's like a standardized format for mapping columns. And this is actually a W3C standard that allows you to take the spreadsheet and generate triples directly from it. And so the paper that is in the references is actually where we talk about this. So the idea is that by recording all this detailed information about the upload, it allows you to basically at any point in the future completely replicate the graph locally, which you can then compare to the current graph in Wikidata. So the idea is that you, with this spreadsheet and with the mapping schema, you can perform a query where you compare the current data with the data at the time you uploaded it. And that would be a way to possibly detect things like vandalism or things that that someone has, provided added value to your data. So if all you want to do is upload data, like probably you should just use OpenRefine. But if you want to be able to potentially in the future script these things with other Python scripts, that's really why Vanderbot exists. So hopefully I answered that question.
I couldn't sign in Slack. Yesterday I could, so, but it won't let me today. So if someone can help me, Sarah, if you can see if there's anything in there that we can answer.
I'm not seeing any questions in the Slack.
Okay, thank you. I would say I spent about 2 hours learning Vanderbot. That's my timing required. So I'm glad that I carve out that time, because it does take the concentration, because there's a lot of steps involved and you don't want to lose the train of learning. Yeah.
I was interested in that issue of if people use a Farsi keyboard, that it causes problems in the Arabic. Is that something that like anyone is working on in Wikidata, or is that just like a too big of an issue? Just like a hardware issue?
It really was, it really kind of freaked me out, because what happened was we had a string that we had created, and then there was a string in another wiki, in the item that was being translated, and they looked identical, but yet the part of my script that I was testing it, because as I mentioned, a part of the script is supposed to check for existing combinations of labels and descriptions. And so I basically tested, all right, I have an identical label and description. Is it going to find that? And it said there that it wasn't there. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm looking at it right now. It's there. What? And so I ended up having to like go to a Unicode decoder and look at the actual codes and realize like, wow, they're the same. And I have a friend who's kind of like a linguist / computer guy, and he was the one who said, yeah, he actually teaches Arabic, and if his students use a Farsi keyboard, and you use like an auto grading program, it'll count questions wrong because even though they look exactly the same. So the issues really, I mean, if you use a Farsi keyboard and then you tag it as FA, it's fine. The problem is if you use a Farsi keyboard and you type it as AR or vice versa, that's when you're going to run into problems. And like an Arabic speaker could look at it and it looks perfect. It looks exactly right, because the underlining Unicode sequence of characters is actually different. So
I just want to add that because of the scholar himself, the author, he's multilingual, and they were still debating if he wrote Arabic version first or Persian version first. And it's identical when you go to look at the script itself in in the Wikidata item. The title just look exactly the same, and that threw both Iman and I off. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah, we didn't expect that one. So what I can do, Steve, I was gonna add that converter to the slide. I didn't, so I will do that. I will add the Unicode converter you share with us in the slide later.
Thank you. Any last questions from anyone? Oh, here's one in the chat from Magda.
And this may be for Iman. Iman, do you think this is a question for you? Can Iman unmute? Because I think it looks like this is the language question.
She should be able to.
Yeah,
Oh,
hello.
there you go.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Magda. Thank you for your question. Can you hear me well? I'm not sure if.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank
There's
you.
a question in the chat from
Yeah.
Magda. Yeah.
And this is relating the initial letters. I'm not sure. Are you talking about the initial letters in Wikidata or with the data with the CVS and the Wikidata? I don't think there is an issue in adding the initial letter. I think it's a choice because the search would reveal both. Can you tell me more about your test?
So what kind of initial letters in the title, the author's name, or
We have to keep
can you
them.
clarify? Yeah.
We have to keep them, not like
Or not really Arabic script.
Yeah, one thing that I would comment as a person who is an Arabic bystander, it is a bit disconcerting when you're like trying to copy and paste things because Arabic is written from right to left. So if you're like swiping from left to right, the cursor jumps over to the right side when you hit the Arabic. So it's actually difficult to copy and paste sometimes because if you have something in quotation marks, the quotation marks and everything outside of it is going from left to right, but then everything inside the quotation mark is going from right to left. So yeah, it's a bit tricky to do that copying and pasting.
yeah.
We add the live links to all the items in the slide, so you're welcome to explore some more there. So all the items we add are in there, and you can even go from the Wikidata item from translation, and they all link to the original. The original are still kind of work in progress because they are all based on what people had done already. So we just try to enrich the data, and Iman had been working on some. We still work on the others.
Regarding Magda question, maybe she's referring to the al in Roman.
Yeah.
Maybe I can talk further with Magda and explore more about this. I don't think there is like a convention whether to add the al or not with the Roman. It seems that it's very inconsistent. So maybe more guidelines and best practices should be done towards Romanization and how it is how the non-Latin data can be displayed. So maybe we can talk further through email, me and Magda.
Yeah, even in the Romanized version, Magda, because Wikidata doesn't do last name, first name, so all the names in Wikidata are in the natural order. It's not inverted, so you can just write the name out. So if you look at all the Al-Biruni, Al-Jasari, Al-Mirudis, they're all gonna have the L in front of their name in the Romanization. Because it's not the same rule that we do in cataloging. So Wikidata is different. You have to kind of take off all the hats and then wear the hat of Wikidata and how they work. I see. Oh, okay. Is that what you experienced too, Iman? What Magda just said?
Yeah, I need to do some more testing regarding searching.
Okay.
Yeah, but again, I would really recommend more best practices and more guidelines.
Yeah.
When we deal with translation, with
Mhm.
dual script, it's very complicated, and even adding the translated title is another issue.
So that
But-
would be for Wikidata, or for this project, then there has to be, each language has to have its own kind of best practice to go along with it, from what I hear and hear.
Even like for some materials that they haven't been translated, if you would want to create a Wikidata item in English, so how would you compose the title? Would you compose it in transliteration, and which standard of transliteration you would use, or would you translate it? You would make an attempt to translate it. It's kind of like complicated, and maybe again more best practices to guide Wikidata creator how to proceed.
One thing I have been thinking about this too, for like the work that the Italian has the manuscript, they might have created something in Italian, that could, because we are based on the English page. So the same thing, there might be something in Arabic for the works that we are looking at. So that's a lot of these questions. I don't have the answer yet. Maybe Iman, you can help me to find out if there are the Wikidata page in Arabic for what we are working on for the original work. That would be great.
Sure, I think this area has much more potential to explore.
Yeah. So yes, as we are talking, these are things that I found them, but I haven't really have time to discuss with you. So I'm glad they come up. Thank you, Magda, for your question. It opened up other things that in our mind, but we hadn't had a chance to discuss.
So we maybe have time for one more question, but can also wrap up.
So Iman, you got the work cut out for you. Sorry.
Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So thank you so much, Steve and Joy and Iman for answering the questions. And be sure to continue to interact with this presentation on Slack and Twitter and by emailing the presenters. So thank you all very much.